always, each time I talk about Rwanda, and I've done it more than 1,000 times. I've been doing this literally. Been doing it full time since 2008 and part time for the 4 years before that. Two things. One, I can never do justice to this story, and so right at the beginning, I just tell people this is not a balanced presentation on what happened in the Rwanda genocide. It's going to be very, very light on the horror side and very heavy on the side of people who stood up against it, which could give people a very, if my lecture was the only thing they heard, it could be a rather imbalanced presentation. The reason I'm light on the horror side is because I do this almost every day. And I don't think emotionally, mentally, I could handle going back to those places in my mind as often. And I'm also not convinced that horror stories are really going to change the world, because we've got a lot of horror stories. And so the stories need to be told, and there's no way I want to minimize that. And that's what why I make the disclaimer, kind of why I sort of feel guilty if I don't. But we also need to know about the people who did not accept the unacceptable. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is just kind of which stories to go with as we spend time together here this evening. And I really hope that we will have a kind of more formal question and answer time towards the end. But I very much hope that even in the process, somebody just shoots up their hand. I love it. It'll just make my day, okay? So hopefully you'll have a question when you do that. But that this can be conversational. I really, really want it to be. And actually, I'm not starting at the beginning where I often do. I'm starting sort of at the end, because I'm like, I want to make sure I get to this. And if I get carried away with other stories and I don't get to the end, I'm like, I wanted to get to that. And so I'm starting here at the end where the genocide is over. I'm reunited with my wife and our 3 children. My wife's here, and I'll introduce her to you in a little bit. But we're in Nairobi here, and we spent 1.5 years in Rwanda after the genocide, then moved back to the States and lived in Oregon for about 11 years. Family's all grown up now. If you back up from this picture with the kids and this is 2 years, or you're 2 years old? Was it Christmas last year, 2011, 10, I think, but anyway. And Sean, who was that little red-headed kid that was always easy to find in Kigali, is now a tall red-headed kid who's pretty easy to find in Shanghai. He's teaching school over there. Lisa over here is too. It's so funny, I'm easily distracted. My Rwandan friends, they first see this picture. I've showed it to a couple, and they're like, Lisa has a baby? And I'm like, oh no, that's her dog. And for Rwandans and for many developing countries, people are like, why would you hold a dog? But anyway, Lisa is teaching first graders in Shanghai, and Mindy's working with Teresa and I in the little organization we formed. She's helping us distribute this book. I finally got together and pulled the tapes. I made tapes to my wife and children during the genocide because I didn't know if I was going to survive. So I just got this idea to talk on some cassette tapes. So I had about 8 hours of those tapes. And since I was here last fall, a year ago, fall 2010, finally got this thing done. So I'm very happy to have the book done. Haven't gone with a regular publisher yet, so it's still self-published. So Mindy is helping us distribute this and make arrangements for speaking and visiting to schools all around the country. And we actually got into Poland last May. I was just I'll show you some pictures of the other stuff later. Going to China in March. I think some of you who might have been here last year, we had just done this bicycle trip the year before. I had this crazy idea that instead of flying all around the country, we would pedal from our home in Spokane, Washington to DC. And it would have been really cool if we'd have done the whole thing. But it was still cool that we made it to LA. 1,600 miles, nothing to be ashamed of. But we were speaking at schools all along the way, and often the kids would ride with us. It was just great. Living on bikes for 9 months was fabulous. My wife is, can you imagine? Your mom's, come on, she's easily your mom. 9 months living on a bike? Shoot, come on, yeah. But one of the boys that we met, here he is, Jordan. Jordan, in 8th grade, he learned about Holocaust, and like some of you guys in middle school, and genocide, really passionate throughout high school, making a difference. inviting speakers to his school. We're there in his gymnasium on this bicycle trip. 850 kids all there because Jordan invited us to his school. Jordan wrote to Desmond Tutu, invited him, and he didn't come, but he did write back. And anyway, Jordan was just all about attending rallies. He's about to graduate. This is in 2010. He's going to graduate in June 2010. And he's like, okay, rallies have been great, activist groups, fundraising, it's all been good, but I'm going to Sudan. And mom and dad, not too excited, but Jordan, determined kid, and so he's all over the internet looking for some organization who he can partner with and go, especially South Sudan's where he wanted to go, you know, the new country coming and all that cool stuff. And nobody wants an 18-year-old with no skills. And so he's at a rally in San Jose for Darfur, and ending the genocide there in Darfur, and he meets Deng. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard the Lost Boys of Sudan. Deng was 5 years old when his home was attacked. Hiked 1,000 miles, this kid, and tragically, as I was reading about, some of those stories, thought came to me, what about the lost girls of Sudan? Huh? We don't hear about them because as you'd read about stories of characters like Deng would be overcome by militias, be captured, intercepted, ambushed by militias and stuff. The young men often would make it out. But the young women, at best, they would be taken slaves. And that life would be a very, very short life. It's something that you got to stop and think about. And women, and I'll hit this several times here this evening, I am just such a believer in the role that women play in security and stability in a home, in a community, in a nation. And the role that women play is something that I'll be hitting on a lot here this evening for very personal reasons, as you'll see in a little bit. But Jordan did a whole bunch of fundraising. He got his town behind him, Templeton, California, and graduated Wednesday, Thursday night, I don't remember. Skipped the senior party that weekend because Friday morning he's on a plane in LA going to Nairobi, where he's meeting Deng. Deng's wife and children still in Kenya, refugee and moved a lot of people from Sudan to Kenya. And so Deng met him at the airport. They get on a bus. They go to Kampala. Jordan has his connections in Kampala. They rent a truck, a big dump truck, buy a whole bunch of bags of cement and building supplies because Deng had gotten $20,000 to start a clinic in his hometown. Jordan had $3,500, which he decided to spend on mosquito nets and textbooks. Deng, by the way, started working on a master's in public health, so I think Jordan was talking to him, what do we do? What's the best thing South Sudan? And that's what Deng, I'm sure, suggested was mosquito nets and textbooks. And so this is just an awesome picture because since June 29, 2010, he had 525 mosquito nets. And to get a mosquito net, you had to either be pregnant or have a baby, most vulnerable groups. So 525 now times 2, pregnant little baby, 1,050 people sleeping under mosquito nets since June. How many people you think are still alive today because of those mosquito nets that malaria has not killed? I'm thinking, if the boy does nothing else in his life, this is huge already. But that's just the beginning for Jordan. I could tell you more of those stories, but I wanted to brag on him because he inspires me in his passion for making a difference. And he's going to school in Long Beach now. He's there. Was telling me when he's playing soccer with those kids in South Sudan, there is no difference. Don't talk to me about skin color or languages or cultures. Soccer, of course, is the great equalizer. I mean, but we are all one race, the human race. And so Jordan, really, really inspiring character. This is a little different thing. I got my T-shirt on here tonight, and it's called the Million Bone Project. And I bring this because there's all kinds of ways we can respond to genocide. And this is a pretty interesting, creative. She's an artist in Albuquerque, got this idea. And in the spring next year, 2013, she plans to lay out with all kinds of people from all across America. She plans to lay out 1 million bones on the mall in Washington, D.C. These are not real bones. These are bones that people have gotten together at workshops and made them out of, I don't know, plaster or clay or They're saying right now lighter is better because you got to transport all of these. But this was last August. We did a kind of little pre-thing in Albuquerque. We laid out 50,000 bones in the street here. Has a lot of lessons and stuff here. I'll tell you one of the big things that hit me as I was there, and everybody is respectfully laying out these bones on a main street in Albuquerque, was you can't tell if these are bones of African people, Asian people, European people, whatever, because we are all just, this is who the core of who we are. And as they say that I haven't hosted my own kind of bone making seminar yet. I'm on the road so much, that's my excuse right now. But they say as people sit around and talk about the issues in whatever country they are passionate about, what's been going on, and you're forming, there's something about working with your hands. And you artist people, you know what we're talking about. That this shaping. I know it could seem very morbid and very twisted. What do you spend time? One of the things I've learned about I'm still learning after the Rwandan Genocide, is if we can't not judge, we should at least slow down before we judge. So I just wanted to just mention the one project. This is just one rather different way that people are responding. Here at Elon, you've got a stand chapter. You've got a Invisible Children's chapter. You've got other groups who are responding in very, very meaningful ways too. And this man and his wife, this is just another kind of rant. It's in the middle, but in the middle of the story. They both had ID cards that said Hutu. Rwanda had, the majority of people had ID cards that said Hutu. The minority had ID cards that said Tutsi. And if you want to, in the question and answer period, we can explore some of that a little deeper, as like I did with a couple classes today. But when I finally got down and made these tapes, this lady, she is such a sweetie. She and her husband chose to stay in my home with me during the genocide. There's a young lady and a young man you'll meet who had Tutsi ID cards, which meant they were marked to be killed, who stayed in my home too. But this man and his wife stayed, and just to support. And what a huge support they were. She's the one who would go down to the gate when the militia, the killers, would come, and she's the one who would talk to them like a mom. She would kind of pull the mom card on them. Let's just see, trapped at home, soldiers next door. Yeah. In these things, I would sometimes just write in here like I talked on the tape, like it's the tape, April 19, Dear Teresa, today's been relatively quiet in terms of gunfire, and I've been doing more reading. Lying in the hallway was getting old, so I dragged a mattress to our bedroom, to the spot between the bed and the closet, a bit sheltered and different scenery. I hadn't been there long when I heard a shot, a thud that sounded like bricks crumbling. I waited 15 minutes and everything remained quiet, so I silently crept outside for a look around. Sure enough, a stray bullet had slammed into our bedroom wall. I'm not saying this to cause any worry, seeing this is how no one will listen to this tape until it's all over and I'm safe back together with you, Mindy, Lisa, and Sean. Oh, but I got to tell you about yesterday. And I won't go in and read the whole story, but there were soldiers that were next door that day. They had kind of taken over a house next door, and they were roasting a goat and having a party when they saw the young man who was our watchman, who was Tutsi. And typically they would say a Tutsi people would be tall and slender and perhaps a little lighter skin. And this young man kind of fit that stereotype. And these soldiers saw him and they started saying Tutsi, and all of a sudden we thought our house was going to be stormed. And the one who dealt with those soldiers first off was this lady. Courageously, she walked through the yard over towards the fence right next door to us. And what did she? I hadn't made a big deal about this boy hiding in our house because most of the neighbors knew it. But anyway, I won't read that section. But I just was clicking it through and I forgot I had their picture here. They're now retired in Rwanda. Oh, he's the one too who gave me just great advice. He said, Carl, first 3 weeks I couldn't get out of my house. It's 24/7 curfew. The killing is going on all around. He says, Carl, if you're going to make any difference, you got to form a relationship with the people at top. So I'm going to I'll introduce you to some of the people I did build a relationship with during the genocide. But it was his wise counsel, his even-keeled approach Our neighborhood got really cut off from the rest of the city at one point, and people couldn't get to the Red Cross hospital who were wounded. And I thought I would set up a clinic on my front porch. I didn't have a lot of medical training, but I'd get to the Red Cross and get supplies and stuff. And he's like, okay, yeah, there's definitely a need around the neighborhood and stuff, but maybe a clinic on the front porch. Carl, why don't you go to their house instead of them coming to your house? And I'm like, oh, good idea. And it actually was a very good idea. In the evening, the last few weeks of the genocide, I'd get home. I basically was hauling food and water and medicine to groups of orphans. Get home in the evening, tried to get home before 4 o'clock because mortars would fall a lot heavier in the afternoon. But, and then I would take my gym bag and I'd go around the neighborhood from home to home to home. Did a lot to improve relationships with all of the strain and the fear and the suffering that was going on around. So I'm glad I get to introduce you to these two, Pastor Soraya and his wife. We just always called her Ma. Her name is Phoebe. I understand some of you are going to be starting this book next week. Very, very cool. This is the reason why, not just this book, but what was going on in Sudan and Darfur. This is why in 2008 I quit my job. Teresa and I together made this decision, quit my job and started traveling full-time to schools. I'm saying, look, for 88 nights, I'm sleeping in the hallway of my house wondering if the rest of the world gives a rip during the Rwandan Genocide. Now I'm outside in the rest of the world. What am I doing? And so that's when, with the Darfur, the genocide going on there was really what finally got me talking to an activist. Some of you know with STAND and Genocide Intervention Network, Adam Sterling, about what was going on. And I said, yeah, okay. Because I don't know, honestly, when you introduced me, the only American that stayed in Rwanda, I haven't found any other Americans yet. In Kigali, I'm pretty sure there were no others who were there, especially in the section of the city that was controlled by the genocidal government where all the killing was going on. That's where I was. But I wasn't the only foreigner. This might have been the only American, but there were 5 Catholic Sisters of Charity from Spain. Courageous sisters. Ah, man. And 2 Catholic fathers, a Frenchman and a German, in a church. The sisters were with an orphanage, an old folks home. They said, there's no way we're leaving here. Stubborn. I didn't get to write a whole lot about them, but a little bit. Mother Superior in Nairobi sent word over there to the UN. You get in there and you get those sisters out of there. You break down the gates if you have to, but those sisters, they weren't going anywhere. And very courageous. And then the fathers, they were at a church trying to protect a group of people in a church. And unfortunately, that didn't end well at all. The 2 fathers weren't murdered. There's an incredible respect in Rwanda, like many developing countries, for foreigners. An incredible value and respect. And so some people say, well, do you think you were safer because you were, a foreigner? In some ways, yeah, I think so. Other ways, they threatened there were rumors going around I would be kidnapped and held as a hostage and all those other things. So I was also pretty high profile in the fact that I was traveling around the city. But 5 Catholic sisters, 2 Catholic fathers, myself, that's 8. Frenchman with a house, just a regular home, 12 orphans, kids affected by AIDS. Either parents died from AIDS or they're HIV positive. And when all the other foreigners, 5, 6, 7,000, I'm not sure how many foreigners there were in the city. There were a lot. When all of them left, Mark, the Frenchman, no, je ne quitte pas, I'm not leaving. And he's there with his little home and orphans, long hair and beard. The kids called him Jesus. That's number 9. And the Swiss director of the Red Cross, Philip Gaillard. If you've seen this documentary, Ghost of Rwanda, you'll meet Philip, a very powerful story and a very fabulous human. Philip stayed throughout. Now, there were some foreigners who'd come into the Red Cross for a week or 2-week stint. I even met a guy from Kirkland, Washington State. My home is Spokane, Washington. So there were some foreigners who would come for a week or 2, and then they would leave, the relief type of thing with the Red Cross. And there were some of the others with the UN who were there for that UN mission. But in any case, I'm going to skip this one. And we were just in Abu Dhabi the last couple of weeks. Had a great time. Some of you have probably seen the architecture. It's just stunning. Dubai and Abu Dhabi. But we were speaking at schools there. And it was our first time to be able to speak in the Middle East. And I just loved the little pictures I would see of the people of the middle, the little mental images that are sticking with me. We're at like a Epcot over there. It's the global village. And so it's all kinds of countries represented and even Ferris wheel rides. But I love, all the dads are in their white robes and their head, boy, what do you call that? Okay, thank you. And the women with their abayas and yes, thank you. The dads were just incredibly attentive to their kids. Now, that shouldn't be a surprise, I'm told, after being there, but you know how stereotypes are. And I hadn't spent much time. And I just looked at that and I'm like, cool. Very, very, very cool. But because, and the other thing, come on, there was one other thing that really hit me. It was really, Teresa, what was the other thing? Oh, well, it'll come later if it's important. Yeah. My friend, I met a new guy from Saudi Arabia, and he's in Dubai. He's back and forth. He's in finance, banking, and stuff like that. And took us out to eat and just couldn't feed us enough. We're at an Indian restaurant. You got to try this. You got to try that. And he knows we're vegetarians. Well, how about this? And I'm like, Jamal, this is so much. And we're done barely getting out of the restaurant, so full. There's this French bakery next door. You got to try. Wait. Okay, let's go. When I was saying, Jamal, it's just too much food. He says, listen, if I really went Arab on you, he says, we would only be beginning this food journey, he says here. And I'm like, go Arab on me? I like it. I like it a lot. Because I think many of my friends back home, they would wonder what that, but the hospitality and the generosity, it was a fabulous visit. I know that this school, let's see, this microphone, I'm not doing very good, am I? Okay, I'll cover my t-shirt. Let's see if this will hopefully not drive crazy there. Yeah, it was gorgeous. But I know this school is known for its travel and your students and your international experiences. So I'm preaching to the choir here. But the history part, just real fast. Late 1800s, the Germans are there in Rwanda. World War I, and everything at the end of World War I taken away from Germany. The Belgians come in. The Belgians do find a group of people who call themselves Tutsi. Many of them in chief positions of different hills around the country and stuff. Hutus also in chief positions, but more Tutsis than Hutus. And the big difference, which is no big difference if you ask me, but they would say that the Tutsis were taller and the Hutus were darker. And the Tutsis had cattle and the Hutus had agriculture. Tutsis 10-12%, Hutus maybe 85%. Now what's the big deal with height? It's not basketball, huh? What's the big deal with skin color? Oh, well, I guess we'd have to ask almost every country in the world. What's the big deal with skin tone and skin color? And you know how we just, I don't want to get any darker. I've been at some, no, look how pale I am, and I've got to get all of the skin tone stuff. But those are all values we assign to them. I've always said, well, the cow and the agriculture and the cattle, you can see a problem, get your cow out of my garden. But aside from that practical part, there's really same language, same traditions, same foods, and then they just married each other by the thousands. By the thousands in Rwanda. You just, not uncommon at all. We were in the UK last October talking to schools, and I said, hey guys, it's just come to me as I was trying to talk and illustrate this. I said, there's so much more difference between Brits and Americans than there ever was between Hutus and Tutsis. So much more difference. And while we still speak sort of the same language, you can tell. But in Rwanda, no, you can't. And so anyway, the Belgians really got aligned tightly with the minority group, the Tutsi people. Education, positions in the church, positions in the government, all the favoritism. For so many years that goes on. Come the late 59, 60, and they have what they called a Hutu revolution, and understandably the people were were saying this is not right, this kind of discrimination. And so independence is coming to the whole continent too. When everybody's going to get, one man, one woman are going to get a vote, this isn't going to survive with the minority leading and power and stuff. And so there's a real tragic time. There's a lot of killing that happens in this change of power here. And many of the people with Tutsi ID cards fled. Tutsi ID cards given. The Belgians are the ones who said, we got to really get this clear here, and who's Tutsi and who's then the cards. And so a lot more, a people who I think naturally would grow together and live together and build relationships in harmony. That didn't seem what the Belgians wanted at that time. And so there was this real working on separating of the people. So the planning of the genocide was the biggest task, I think, that the planners of the genocide had, was to break the relationships between the Hutus and Tutsis to be able to carry out their part. And let's just get to those planners real quick here. Back there, 59-60, many people flee the country thinking that we'll come back in a week or two when things settle down, a month or two. They're not allowed back for years, 10, 20, 30. Finally, 30 years later, they come back with guns. They've helped Museveni in Uganda get into power, get rid of Idi Amin, got their military training, got high positions in the Ugandan military. And then the day comes in October 1990 when a whole big, platoon or whatever of the Ugandan army is out on a kind of maneuver. It's a holiday and stuff. And they're told, boys, rip off those Ugandan military flags or badges or whatever they were. You are the Rwandan Patriotic Front, because it happened to be a almost completely Tutsi platoon in the Ugandan military. And they attack Rwanda, and thus starts a 3-year war. The government, of course, is fighting off. These are the bad guys with the guns. And you know who else is the bad guy? Anybody in town here who's sympathetic to them. Anybody who's Tutsi, definitely bad. Married Tutsi, definitely bad. And so this whole creation of an enemy within. It's time of war and fear that people really are fertile ground for divisive thinking and talk. Really, really easy time in a time of war. What were we like here in America just fresh after 9/11? And 9/11 was horrific, but 9/11 was very, very small in comparison to what was happening in Rwanda. What happened in 9/11 is what would happen in Rwanda in a morning. And that went on for 100 days. And so within this huge context of the war before, that's what then it's getting ready now for what's even worse, this genocide that's coming. Questions or comments here? So the government is holding them back 3 years. Finally, they get a ceasefire. Everybody's going to be part of the new government. The Rwandan Patriotic Front, who had come in from, I kind of skipped over here, and the first president in Rwanda and the second one, he was the military guy. He ousted this guy, and real tight connections with France. And 1990, the Rwandan Patriotic Front now comes, and we've got this war for 3 years. Government's holding them, trying to hold them back, creating the enemy within, and even doing massacres during those 3 years within our country. And then a ceasefire, broad-based transitional government to be installed till they have elections. But there's that small group in the old government who says we will never share power. To share power is worse than defeat. And they're the ones who planned this extermination campaign. If we would have killed all those Tutsis back in 1959-60, we wouldn't be dealing with them now. They're the enemy. They're the ones with the guns. They're the ones who are sympathetic. And so they plan, put it out through propaganda, through the radio, through educators. Imagine yourself a teacher and you're told to start listing in your classroom who's the Hutu and who's the Tutsi. What for? Do you just go along? It's something that the Ministry of Education said, or do you stand up? Different points along the way. I'd love to, as you unpack this, to see the individual stories of people and the choices they made as this preparation for genocide is coming. Sula, she's such a sweetie. Her short part of her story here. 70-year-old widow. She chooses to hide 17 people in a little shelter she had made for her. Let's just start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, 16. So all of you on the front row here, alive, because this 70-year-old widow, who was a traditional healer, in reality it meant she had a reputation for being possessed with evil spirits. It's hard to sell me on that one when I look at her sweet face there. But she had this reputation for being possessed with evil spirits, and she used that reputation to keep the killers at bay. 17 people alive because of her. I love her story because, number one, she's a woman. And again, women so often undervalued, underappreciated, their role in times like, I love it. She's old. Older people, undervalued, underappreciated. Always say the largest untapped alternative energy source on our planet, the elderly. I love it because she's Hutu, and a lot of people want to say, well, the Hutus were killing the Tutsis. Well, yes, many Hutus did kill many people with Tutsi ID cards, but there were many Hutus too. Many. I just used a couple of manys, and if there were more manys of Sulas, the genocide wouldn't have happened. So significant numbers of people stood up against it and died. But unfortunately, even more people did not. Thus, the genocide succeeded. I love it because she's got a reputation that I wonder why, with that reputation of being possessed by evil spirits, those 17 people came to her in the first place. Lots of stories to learn and unpack from this time. And another lady who would go looking for the living among the dead. Incredible. That's what a mom would, that's what a grandma would do, isn't it? Wouldn't you? That doesn't surprise you that a grandma would do that. If the smell is coming out of the house just down the street and the flies are buzzing, and grandma courageously steps in that house and hears a groan or a grunt and finds somebody alive, and she brings them home and tries to disinfect their wounds with whatever training she has, bandage with whatever material she has. There's just all kinds of stories of courage during this time. A few pictures here. I was just there last month. That's our pickup truck full of suitcases. This is the gang I was with, Buffalo State College. Drew Kahn, their theater guy, passionate about using theater to address social justice issues. Yeah, theater can be entertaining, it can be funny, but it better have a point. It better be communicating something about our world and how we can make it better if you're involved with his theater. And those are students, theater students from Buff State who got to go. And we had a fabulous time there for 2 weeks. They met all kinds of people, particularly a theater group called Masharika here with Arthur and Dita and Simon and Rosette and Angel and Hope and Charles and up in the top corner there, Annette. Oh, you should hear her with a microphone as a DJ. She can bring the house down. But they are. This thing I'm not really working using it all right. We're doing okay? All right. They're a theater group that the Buff students just bonded with almost immediately. And I just found the theater students so inclusive. I could really go off on the role of theater in terms of really talking about the courage to speak. The courage to speak when other people are not speaking out. But we had a fabulous time. And at the end of the 2 weeks, they got together with that theater group. They wrote a totally new play, wrote music for it, practiced and performed it the last night. And if you'd like to watch that play, some of you I know are just in Rwanda and stuff like that. Our Facebook page is called World Outside My Shoes. And so you can go on that Facebook page and you can find the links. You can also go down far enough, you'll find the links to the students' blogs. I think some of you might be interested in reading the blogs of these kids who are just in Rwanda. Oh, that was just to show you that we have malls in Rwanda. And if you forget your treadmill, you can get one in Rwanda. I don't recommend the motorcycle taxis. They are exciting, but I don't think they're very safe. That's coming from a guy who went through a genocide, okay? The kids, I just feel like with kids, we can more easily see ourselves. We can more easily connect with a group of people when we look at the children of those people. Little girl probably doesn't own a toothbrush, but on the way to school, she'll break off a twig, chew it till it's soft, and use that twig. And look at her gorgeous smile. Look at her healthy gums. Or you don't have a soccer ball, plastic bags and strings, you make that soccer. Or banana leaves and vines, you make that. Or you don't have money to go to the mall to buy toys, you make this awesome homemade scooter. Isn't it? Who came in here with the longboard? Where are you? Yeah. Wouldn't you like to take that one for a ride? I mean, it's got suspension right here. It's rubber from a tire. So the plank kind of floats up and down the shaft. And of course, here's the braking system, OSHA approved. It's just the whole point with the no soccer ball and no toothbrush and no money for a toy is something you see again and again in the developing world. You are not defined by what you don't have. Principle is how Rwandans are moving forward today. Not that we'll ever forget or would never want to forget what we lost and what was taken from us. But if the majority of our time is spent on what we lost, we're going to be in trouble to move forward. So we focus on what we have and then what we can do with what we have. That's probably one of the best things I could tell you this evening. Family, as you can see, you saw it in the other picture, we were really young. We were there 4 years. The picture you saw at the airport was the end of the genocide, 1994. This picture is the fall of 1989. So when we first moved there, Sean isn't even 2 years old. Mindy is 6. I think Lisa's 3 years old. And Teresa and I actually met in high school. And we did accounting together in college. It was very good. It added up. And a week after, kind of corny, but a week after graduation, we got married. And 6 weeks later, we moved to Zimbabwe. She was 22, I was 23. Our daughters were born in Zimbabwe. High school shop teacher, auto mechanics, welding, Teresa business and accounting. After 6 years, came back to the States, got an MBA. And there just weren't so many really cool international development majors and things like that when I was in college. And so I put together my high school shop teacher stuff and my MBA stuff. And then we went to Rwanda. And we went to Rwanda to build schools with a humanitarian group called ADRA, the humanitarian arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, building schools, operating clinics. Like I said, 6 months after we got there, a war started, which meant that we started working in displaced camps. We soon, by the time the war was over, 7 million people in Rwanda, almost 1 million of them chased out of their homes. 900,000 people out of their homes in camps. To add to that, in this tiny little country, 100 miles by 100 miles, so it's, I don't know, probably less than half of North Carolina, this little country, we have not only close to 1 million people chased out of their homes by 3 years of war, Burundi, trouble to the south, fighting. 350,000 people from Burundi in Rwanda. So when the genocide does get launched, explodes, or whatever you want to say, we've got 900,000 people in camps. We've got 350,000 in others, so we've got 1.25 million people in camps in this tiny little country. Many of those Burundians picked up knives and machetes, and they were predominantly Hutus who had fled violence in Burundi. This whole idea of good guy, bad guy, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy? Oh, is it the Hutus bad guys, Tutsis are good guys? Well, it depends on the timing and the situation and the place where you find yourself, because within each one of us, we can do it. We can do the horrible things, and I know we don't like to admit that, but we can also do the incredible things as well. We all can do it. We all can do them both, and we do it actually all the time, sometimes even in the same day. Our home was really comfortable, looking out over the city there. Some of you who saw Hotel Rwanda, that's up in the trees, just up below that really tall building. The hotel that the film was based on. We're looking out over the city. My little buddies, when I'd come home from work, my 3 musketeers. This is Comrade right here. Comrade's older brother was really best friends with our boy Sean. They played together for hours. And you'll meet Comrade's grandma in just a minute. Somebody asked about our kids, and growing up in Africa. It was just a wonderful place to grow up. I know what you know about Rwanda mostly is probably that 3-month horrible window called genocide. But Rwanda is so much more than that little window. And I feel guilty again that so much of my time is spent on that 3-month window. But if we don't understand that 3-month window, it's very hard to understand Rwanda today and the miracles of Rwanda today. But like I said, the kids kind of stood out in the neighborhood. But for 4 years, they're playing in the neighborhood. For 4 years, they're playing with the neighborhood kids, and they're making deposits in the hearts of the women, the grandmas, the aunts of the neighborhood. Kind of a strange phrase, but when you're playing with someone else's kids, you know the bonds that are growing there. And the plane is shot down, the president's plane. Remember I said they had gotten everybody together? We're going to have a new broad-based government. It's never launched. It's delayed January, February, March. We're coming to April. The president goes out of the country trying to get this new, at least that's the story, trying to get the new government launched, talking to other African heads of state, and flying back in. Sweet little jet, a gift from the president of France, little executive jet, and boom, surface-to-air missile. We hear the explosion at our house. He's killed. The word goes out immediately on the radio. The Tutsis have killed the president here, just like they did in Burundi. Several months ago in October, the previous year, the military in Burundi had killed the first democratically elected president in Burundi. And so it wasn't a hard sell with many people. They're like, oh yeah, those rebels, those cockroaches, those snakes, and all the names that they become so familiar with. The Inkotani, they are the Inyenzi, sorry, that's the word that they would use. The Inyenzi for cockroach. They're the ones who killed our president. And so within 45 minutes, roadblocks are going up. And the killing is getting very, very intense and serious now. I say getting serious and intense now. There have been massacres over the previous years, but now all of a sudden this was a whole new realm. It depended what your ID card said, whether you lived or died. If it said Tutsi, that was it. Most of the time you obviously wouldn't even go on the streets if you didn't have a Hutu ID card. The radio was really effective. I'm not going to go through all of the propaganda here. Well, I will pause. You know, I'm sick, doctor. What's your sickness? The Tutsis, the Tutsis, the Tutsis. And I pause there because I don't know how many times I've said, I'm so sick of, and you fill in that blank. What are you sick of? What do you do with what you're sick of? You eliminate. This is a sickness. This is a poison. We're going to solve this problem by getting rid. That's the message. We're going to solve this problem by getting rid. And anytime that's the message, anytime that's the means of solution, problem solving by exclusion, it's going to be temporary at best, and it's going to be genocide at worst. Here's the young lady who lived and worked in our home, had been there for 3 years. The kids loved her. My wife and I loved her. Very kind and never complained, honestly. I mean, very just loyal and just a really nice person. But her ID card said she was the enemy. And so, because it said Tutsi, my wife and I basically, we honestly couldn't think about just leaving her. I mean, the government is saying go. The little conversation I had with our consulate officer, Laura Lane, she's a wonderful, wonderful person. But she's in foreign service. Some of you guys are probably going to foreign service. She was barely 26, maybe 27 years old. And she's responsible now to get all 257 of the Americans out of the country. That's her job. There's a lot more I'd like to tell you about her. In fact, boy, Frank, I know you're leaving here with somebody else. You want to get an incredible speaker here, invite Laura Lane now. She doesn't work for the State Department anymore. She was with Citigroup for a while. She was also with Time Warner. She's been running with Citigroup about 200 and some countries for them. Laura is a very capable woman. But back here when she's in Rwanda, we're on the radio talking together on the ham radio. It's 10 a.m. Sunday morning. The plane was shot down Wednesday night. Thursday, our neighbors start killing, and I'll just go back to Thursday in a moment. But Friday is when the American Embassy says we're leaving. Saturday is going to be the first convoys out. Sunday, the last convoys out. 10 a.m., minutes before the tank arrived, we actually got a UN tank to come escort Therese and the children. My mom and dad were visiting. A tank actually escorted our vehicle to the ambassador's home. But 10 minutes before the tank arrived, I had the following radio conversation with Laura Lane, our U.S. consulate officer. Carl, the missionaries in the dental compound are making their way to the ambassador's home. Over. Laura, good copy. Over. Carl, I'm ready to send my family to the ambassador's home now. Over. Laura, what do you mean send your family? Over. Carl, I'm not leaving. Over. Laura, We are all leaving. You don't have a choice. Over. Carl, as a private American citizen, I do have a choice. I'm not leaving. Over. Laura, okay, well, then you need to sign a paper stating that you've refused the help of the United States government to leave Rwanda. Over. Carl, okay. Over. I took out one of Mindy's school notebooks and ripped the page out of there and wrote on it, I have refused the help of the United States government to leave Rwanda. And I signed and dated that declaration and folded it and handed it to Teresa. It's an event that has engraved itself permanently into my memory. To some it might seem melodramatic, but you have to understand that up to this point, I had this pride and trust in America. Signing, dating, and folding this paper did not take long, but it caused me to pause and think deeply about what that pride and trust really meant. Cutting ties with possible assistance from the U.S. government was not something I was taking lightly. Looking back, I think this was the beginning of a shift from my trusting in institutions and governments to trusting in individuals. And that's what really it became for me throughout the genocide, building relationships with people to basically meet the needs of the orphans that were around there. Now, let's see, where are we? Okay, I need to wrap this up here in the next few minutes, and we'll have a Q&A time. So I'll end with this. This was the young man who was the watchman. He also, at our home, he also had a Tutsi ID card. So there were two people in our home who had Tutsi ID cards, the young lady and the young man. She's married, in case I get wrapped up in other things and don't tell you. She's married today. She's got two beautiful boys. I was just in her living room with the Buffalo State kids. They were pretty excited to meet her. Buffalo State last year asked for the manuscript for this book, and they wrote a play based on this book. And so the students performed that play last September, and two of the kids who were in the play were with us at the college. I don't know if you saw Shabar in the van with his long hair and his dreadlocks, and Julia was another blonde girl in there. So they were pretty excited to meet Anita there in her home. And she had baked all kinds of little baked goodies for us and drink and things. But and her husband, Anita lost everybody except for her little brother who was going to school in the Congo at the time of the genocide, so he was saved. When he came back, he stepped on a landmine, wasn't killed, lost the lower part of one leg. But she says he's married, he has two children, and it's just like her. She's focusing on what he's got. And you know, she married a man who's, during the genocide, the years before the genocide, his ID card said Hutu. Though her whole family had been murdered by people with Hutu ID cards, she married a man. And when I talked to her kind of gently about how inspiring her story was, she didn't get it. She's like, what do you mean inspiring? And I kind of said, well, you know, it was awkward saying your family killed by Hutus, you married a Hutu. I mean, I didn't expect to get in. I just thought I'd say your story is inspiring. And she'd go, oh, well, thank you. But she goes, what do you mean? And so I finally awkwardly stumbled through, and then she goes, oh, mais nous sommes tous les enfants de Dieu, she says. But we're all the children of God. Well, yeah. Everybody knows that, right? Or we know it, but we don't really know it, huh? That's just another illustration of how still in Rwanda, it's incredible the way people are overcoming what happened to them to basically build something for their kids. Most of them will tell you it's for us, and you'll even talk to guys who were high schoolers at the time of the genocide. And Joseph is a helicopter pilot and a really sharp, he's the best pilot in the country, been trained all over the world and stuff like that. And he says, you know, well, me and my generation were ruined, but we're not giving up because it's for the next generation. I mean, and what? He's 30 years old now, and he's talking about, or 34 years old, and he's talking about the next generation. But you hear it again and again. I was with a group of Rwandans at a memorial time, you know, every April, and one man stood up just honestly, and he said, I'm sorry, I can't forgive what the people did to my family. And another woman in the group stood up and said, you might not be able to for yourself, but we've got to do it for our kids. We've got to do it for our kids. And so there's so many rich wisdom and lessons and things that we have to learn from the people of Rwanda. Like many other people who have been through hardships and have come out and said, yes, there is a tomorrow. No, we are not going to focus on what was taken from us. No, we're not going to forget either. But we're also going to focus on what we have and what we can do with what we have. This whole idea of genocide, I think it stems from this twisted little line right here. There's no such thing as my world. My world is a fictionary, it's a figment, it's a fantasy between my ears. It's our world, and this whole idea that our world would be better with you. I just love it when we meet people who are different, people who have different cultures and different languages and accents. And anyway, the soldiers came. There were enough soldiers to have stopped the genocide, but that wasn't their job. Their job was to evacuate the foreigners. And I'm skipping this story right here at a mental hospital where the lady just begged the television lady. You can see this on YouTube if you want to watch this documentary. It's powerful, Ghost of Rwanda, as she begs the television lady when she finds out the soldiers aren't going to help us. And the television lady, she's like, we couldn't do, years later, she says, we couldn't do, she pauses. At the moment, she corrects herself, we thought we couldn't do anything. Tell me she hasn't been thinking about it for years since then. And the guy, she later says in her interview, it could have been different. And the guy says, what do you mean it could have been different? Because you see, when she left with the soldiers, all of these people were murdered. Well, there were a couple of survivors. And almost every time, it's not easy to kill people just so quick like we often see it portrayed. And there seem to always be 1, 2, 5 survivors. I've actually met a survivor from this massacre. In any case, the Belgian lady says it could have been different. And the interviewer says to her, what do you mean? How? Somebody has to decide it will be different. And nobody decided. That, to me, is gold right there. That's why I said at the beginning, it's people who are not willing to accept the unacceptable. I know there might seem like no other alternative, and when I chose to stay, that didn't seem smart to many people by their heads. And it wasn't a decision of the brain, it was a decision of the heart. But the neat thing about this whole thing, about it being a decision of the heart, was that I wasn't just alone in that decision. When you have somebody else who is totally with you in the decision, she's not telling me that well, okay, or maybe, or anything else. But when you decide this is not acceptable, yeah, obviously, I could have died at that time. And Teresa will tell you that she didn't choose to think about that part of it. She focused on the kids, like moms do, and she provided a sense of security and stability for the kids. Let me just flip to the picture of the kids. If you want to tell them, is this guy still, or she'll talk? Oh yeah, would you just use that for a minute? Just tell them a little bit as the evacuation is going on. Most of the Europeans are flying out, but the Americans are driving out in a convoy. I had made this camper on the back of our pickup. What was that like for you?
As we were leaving Kigali to start heading south to Burundi, there were lots of roadblocks already in place, probably about every block or every 2 blocks. And of course, they stopped us. They wanted to know a lot of things about us, what we had. I think, they never talked to me directly because I was in the back of the camper with the kids, along with Carl's mom, who was visiting us. So I really don't know exactly why they were stopping and questioning, but I do know that his father, who was driving, had the experience of having these young guys with grenades in their hands, kind of threatening him with it as he stopped. And they did bang a lot on the sides of the camper. They even tried rocking it a bit. They tried the door. Unfortunately, we were able to keep it locked, and they never forced their way in. They never did anything other than just kind of those threatening types of things, which we are very grateful for, because our kids never saw anything they don't have any visual memories of what happened, what they'd been through, what we traveled through. My father-in-law did see, he remembers a vehicle going by, a big pickup truck with a lot of dead bodies in the back of the pickup. But I was just really grateful that our kids have grown up without those memories.
When you look at them, they don't look like they're running from a genocide, huh? And you ask Lisa there with her legs crossed, were you afraid? And she says, no. Why not? Because Mom wasn't afraid. This whole idea of the role I was talking about earlier, women play. If you haven't seen that little clip on YouTube, watch it. It's just worth it. The Girl Effect. Some of you have seen that one? It's a great little, it's just introducing a subject. It's just a tiny part of the story, but it can bring about a real shift in our thinking about the role of women. And it's not just the girl effect. The girl effect becomes the mom effect. And the mom effect becomes, I skipped over these pictures back here, our neighborhood, some of the first people who were killed in this home. We watched them walk down the street, taking the things out. He was a banker, taking the things out of their home. They had draped her body over the fence. The children, they boosted into the yard of the orphanage, and the children survived in this orphanage, but the mom and dad did not. And then they came to our gate that night, Thursday night, and they came there with their machetes and their clubs. But our neighbors, notice little mud brick tin roof houses all around our house. This house wasn't there at the time. There were more tin roofed homes there. And out of those little mud brick tin roofed homes came women. Not ordinary women, not normal women. If they were ordinary or normal, I think they would have stayed in their home taking care of their own kids. That's what it seems to me an ordinary, normal person would do. But these are extraordinary, courageous women. And they came out. And remember I said our kids for 4 years making deposits in the hearts of the moms in the neighborhood, the grandmas in the neighborhood. They're not coming out with machetes. They don't have weapons. Well, they do. They're armed with stories. Isn't that what grandmas are armed with all the time? And the power of stories to change the way we think. Somehow their stories did. I don't know how they did it. This is Comrade's grandma. I introduced you to Comrade earlier. She's another one of the ladies. But they told them, these people have been our neighbors. In the middle of the night, we can knock on the door and they'll take us to the hospital or do whatever. And the most powerful thing that I always remember is they said, you can't go in there. Their kids play with our kids. The relationships our kids were building, I think, were the hugest part that influenced our neighbors to stand up for us. What would they have done if they came in our house? Well, at minimum, they would have robbed. At worst, I don't even want to imagine. But they didn't come in because our neighbors stood up for us. And so we'll wrap up here. If you'd like to ask some questions. Teresa and the kids go to Nairobi. Every day she finds someone to watch the kids while she walks down to the American Embassy or to another aid office to talk to me on the radio. Those radio conversations were huge for me, huge. She said it made a difference for her too. And for 3 weeks, I couldn't get out of my home. Eventually, I went to this guy's office. He was in charge of the city, Colonel Renzaho. And I sort of became friends with him. I said, how can I help? Remember the pastor I introduced you to at the beginning? He went with me. We met that colonel. We built a relationship. This is a guy who was later arrested for for genocide, crimes against humanity. He's in prison serving a life sentence. During those 3 months of the genocide, though, he and I built a type of relationship. He helped me save people's lives. He directed me to several orphanages. The Frenchman, Mark, with his long hair and beard, he directed me to Mark's house. He directed me to Damas's orphanage here in Nyamirambo. And this was an orphanage that the first day I came in the gate, there were fresh little graves to the left. Little ones not being killed by machetes and mortars, little ones who are dying from diarrhea and dysentery, desperate for water, desperate for medicine, and these desperate for food. So that defined then, what can I do? Bring water, find food, bring medicine. And so for the 3 months, I worked on, a little more than 2 months, first 3 weeks in my house, a little more than 2 months, worked on relationships with the thieves who had stolen powdered milk, with the thieves and killers who had stolen fuel, with the top leaders down to the guys at the level of the ground, just to be able to bring support to these groups of orphans. And, well, we've gone the whole circle. If you have some questions, we'd be happy. They do have, are you going to? Okay. If you want to ask her questions, you can ask her. But they do have a couple of microphones that makes it easier if you do have a question. Yep. Got to take off. Totally understand. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. And we won't be long, but if you do it, and if you'd like to take a book with you this evening, we ask for a $10 donation, but if you've got $1, that's fine. It's really a donation. It's not like a price. If I tell people too, if you got $300, whatever. But and if you'd like to make a donation later, there's a PayPal button on our website, so you could just make a little $10 donation or something later. But if you'd like, please do take a book with you if you'd like to read it. But if you have a couple questions, somebody want to break the ice, or yeah, please. If you don't mind coming to the microphone, that'd be really, really, really helpful.
Could you talk a little
on the table over there. Here you go. Go ahead.
Could you talk a little bit about like how the healing process occurred? I know you talked about like the love of all people, but like, is there any leadership or organization that like took charge?
Yeah. Thank you. That's really, I'd love to spend our whole hour on that part of the rebuilding and the amazing part with the healing and stuff like that. I'm going to be very pragmatic initially. There were, yes, religious groups and nonprofit and government initiatives to promote reconciliation. People would often say, reconciliation, that kind of sounds like two people who've done, what about when one person has done nothing but been killed? We still call that reconciliation? Well, in any case, yes, so terminology is an issue and stuff, but Rwanda really has, like many other countries in the developing world, value community, talking. Gacaca process was part of that. That was the legal system, the legal plan they put in place to try when you had hundreds of thousands of people to try. They didn't have enough lawyers and judges and everything else to do that. Gacaca gave people permission to talk about the genocide. And when people would confess, prisoners would come and stand before the community. That's Gacaca. Thursday afternoon, businesses are shut down. Everything in town is shut down. You're expected to come to the football field, the soccer field, and we're going to have Gacaca, and they're going to bring people out of prison, and they're going to confess. And if their confession meets up with the survivors and others' memories of it, then sometimes they'll be released earlier, and it was just part of that process. But confession was huge. Also, people said, Gacaca helped me to find out where my family was buried. I never knew, and that was huge for me, that kind of closure and those things. So Gacaca had a role, but then just plain flat out, I can't, it's hard to find work. I got to get my kids in school. I got to get a school uniform. I don't want to work with this woman. Her husband was involved with killing, or she was involved with killing. But you know what? I need the job. I don't want to live in this neighborhood anymore. I don't want to live by that church. I don't want to live by that school where those things. I don't have any place else to live. So the necessity of having to live forced people almost. And that force, sometimes, yeah, it would work. Other times it wouldn't. Depression, people wanting to take their, even today, kids, they hardly knew what was happening at the time, but they've grown up. And so those are big issues they're wrestling with. But the most effective forms have been not from external intervention. It has been Rwandans themselves talking to others and saying, look, like I said earlier, for our children, if for no other reason. We can't, this is a poison of hatred and bitterness. This will kill us. And so people talking among, you'll hear about faith being huge, and that's a really interesting double-edged sword, because people often understandably say, how can you believe in God? Where was God at a time like this? And other people will say, God works through people. The question isn't where was God? The question is where were the people who claim the name of God? There's great betrayal that people are trying to process through of churches and religion. Great betrayal of government. How can you trust your government when the government was ordering the massacres? Now we've got a new government, and you're just a new face, and we're supposed to trust you. So the government of Rwanda has worked very hard. They have an ombudsman who has worked on rebuilding the credibility between the people and the government. and the accountability that the government is bringing in, the transparency has been large in this healing process. I asked a survivor, I was with a group of teachers last summer, asked a survivor who's now a judge, is there any remorse? That's what some of the teachers wanted to know. Is there any remorse among the killers? And the judge says, that's a very hard question to respond to in general terms, because everybody is different. But he's a really nice guy, and he says, if I was to generalize, among the older people, less, much less remorse. Among the younger people, feeling like they were tricked and deceived into this killing, more remorse. And so it's a whole big process. And to say, I don't want to put down external intervention. World Vision, I understand, I just was learning about it when I was there last month, has had some really, they say, impressive programs in terms of bringing healing there too. So it has been a partnership effort. But I would say by and large, it's the day-to-day necessity of having to live again. Look, my husband's in prison. To keep him alive, I'm trying to bring some decent food to him. Will you watch my baby while I'm gone? My little child. Your husband's in prison. My husband is dead. You want me to watch your baby? Well, what did your baby do? Nothing. Okay, I'll watch your baby. The necessity of living together and having to live through life together has, I think, been one of the biggest blessings in bringing healing together. Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes?
With having Tutsis and Hutus living in your house, was there ever any sort of underlying tension or overt tension?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that, because there's another picture that shows them sitting around a table, all five of us around a table in our house, and absolutely not. They are the young lady who I showed you when we went to the pastor and his wife's house with the students from Buffalo State. She was there helping prepare the meal. This lady who was in our house, I would say, has probably become her mother. She lost her mother in the genocide. And the two of those women, you know where they slept every night? They went in the pantry. It was a pretty big walk-in pantry, but they drug a mattress in there, and these two women slept in that pantry every night with their head under the bottom shelf because they had the most cement walls between them and the outside. And sometimes when I would walk past the kitchen with a little window in it and the pantry over there in the evening, they had turned in early, I would hear giggling coming from the pantry. And so the bonds that were formed between these people, especially the young lady and the couple there, till this day is you probably can't get closer bonds. And I really want people to understand the Hutu-Tutsi thing is not a thing, I guess. It's a very complex, but often in many ways, it's not a major defining factor in people's lives. There's other things that they see much deeper than that. They see people who stood up against the killing. They see people who stood next to them. They see people who suffered loss too. And so there's deep insights. There's a real reading of hearts that happens in not only developing all around the world, but in countries that have gone through great hardship. There's a real, it seems to be, ability to read and to be gracious. That is astounding. It's miraculous to have grace after something like that. Thanks for that question. And okay.
We saw that how in one of the orphanages, it was your job essentially to go out and find medication and clean water. I know it's really difficult to come across those resources, especially in Africa, and especially in a time of genocide. How did you come across that? How did you end up providing for that orphanage?
Thank you. You're really beginning to appreciate the challenges at that time. She's saying, trying to find food and water in normal times can be tough. How are you doing it during the times of this? Water, there was a water point that if you waited at the line, you could get water, so it wasn't hard to get there. The biggest challenge wasn't the water, it was containers to carry the water and a vehicle to carry the containers. I got the vehicle from the colonel who was in charge of the city, my relationship with him. Actually, the first vehicle he lent me was used half-time by me and half-time by the killers. So you can imagine, part of the day I'm using it to help the orphans, the other part of the day they're perhaps hauling bodies with it. But that I said, man, give me another truck, and he helped me, and I got another truck, and then barrels, and there's a kind of fun chapter of the kids who helped me, even under sniper fire, wash these barrels and prepare them. So basically, and then the Red Cross was right there. They tried to go out and help people, but their people were being killed at just inconceivable numbers. The Red Cross meant nothing. So they made the difficult decision to say, no, we can't send our people out to be killed anymore. If you can get to this school where we have a field hospital, we'll treat you. So they gave me all the medicine I needed, and I would then take that through these roadblocks. I was going through roadblocks that even the UN couldn't go through because they wouldn't let UN vehicles there, but I think my relationship with the colonel is what opened the door there. And then I'd ask the women at the market who had little stacks of powdered milk, little sacks of, I'd say, ma'am, I need like 100 times that. And they would then say, come back in an hour. And I'd come back in an hour, and they would hook me up with usually a soldier and a civilian who had stolen from a store. So there was food available, and there was medicine and water available. The trick was the channel to get to it, and then to be able to get it to the... For example, when I bought all that powdered milk from the thieves, if I took it all to the orphanage, they would rob the orphanage. So I'm like, and if I take it home, they'll rob me at home. Where'd I take all of those 13 cases of powdered milk? To the colonel's office. I said, I need storage space, sir. He gave me a room to store my stuff in his room. I'd take it a box at a time from there. So basically, you just look for it. You build the relationships. There were 3 guys, kind of gang leaders in the center of the downtown. Rastaman, Jaguar, and I forget the third guy's name. I would trade money with them, give them dollars. They would give me local currency. And that kind of, again, was a relationship building experience. And so it was through building relationships with people that I managed to. But it all took such a long time, and it was never enough. Sometimes the kids would be there. They would come and line up at the reservoir when I got there with my truck with their little metal cup, and that would be 1 cup of water. They would have sometimes 1 cup of water for 2 days. And so it was never enough. Yes?
Why do you think the colonel, a man who was convicted
Yeah.
of genocide, why do you think he would help other people?
Really good question. Why would the colonel, a guy eventually convicted of genocide, enough evidence for thousands of lives on his hands, why would he help me? The planners and executioners of the genocide, throughout the genocide, tried to the world to present a face of legitimacy. This whole thing of genocide was couched in terms like work. We're securing the nation. There's the enemy. We're guarding against the enemy. Now, yes, people said, wow, I got the machete above a mother and child, and I'm like, how is this the enemy? But the terms they're using is they're trying to present themselves as legitimate. So I would appeal to that legitimacy that they try. I spoke to him with respect. I knew that he was in charge, and I said, sir, how can I help in humanitarian needs and stuff like that? I think there's a lot to be unpacked in just the power of asking. There's something I think inside all of us that wants to respond to help in situations. Even in a situation like this, our brain would tell us, no, this is the killer. I mean, besides him, I actually one day asked the bogus prime minister, one of 3 guys in charge of the genocide, to call off a massacre, and he did it, which is even more unexplainable to me. Although, when you unpack the story more, you do see there's other factors that I didn't see, and I think he really wanted to use the orphans for bait to get the French to come in there. But in any case, I think people will do things when we ask that they would not do without being asked. That simple. That simple. Other people told me that he was married to a Tutsi. I don't know that, but that was their effort at trying to understand why he helped me. There were people who hid people in their home at the risk of the family members of their home's lives, because if you're caught often hiding, you'll be killed. Your family will be killed. Not always, but most of the time. And then they would go out and kill in the neighborhood. So this person has saved somebody's life, and they've killed. That's why Gachacha was such a dynamic event, those trials, because somebody would stand up and say, he's not telling the whole story. and he did this and this and this. And the prisoner in his pink uniform would say, okay, so you really want to hear the whole story? He'd point at one of the 7 judges, just ordinary people from the community who had been chosen and trained to be these judges. And he'd say, well, yeah, we did that too, but that guy was with us. And all of a sudden, the person one day is on this side of the desk, the next day is in prison. And I mean, it was a very dynamic thing because people are able to do horrible things and fabulous things, even in the same day. Yes?
You said that your understanding is my world is our world. It's so hard to fathom this when it's so far away. How can we be aware of what potentially happened, and how can we tie that into our own lives when we're so far away?
She asked, in this journey from thinking of my world to our world, and these things are so far away, how can we really tie them together? And that's, I love it, because there's 2 things that I think are super powerful to accomplish just that. There's stories and service. Stories from people right here on your campus, stories from people in your community who are from all over the world. We are shocked. The kids who were with me in Buffalo, when they got back, in Rwanda from Buffalo, when they got home, I saw a posting on Facebook. One girl, she says, the guy down at the corner deli is from somewhere in the Middle East. I never knew that. We got to talking, I guess there goes quick stops at the deli from now on, But she, all of a sudden, because she'd been there, she started looking more and finding out. Everybody, of course, has a story. We know that in our head, but do we start living in a world where I want to hear your story? And that takes time. But I want to hear your story. But then hearing a story and doing something, well, if you don't do anything, the story can actually make you worse because, oh, yeah, I heard about that. Yeah, I heard about, oh, yeah, Rwanda, yeah, 900,000, 800,000 people. Yeah, I heard about that. But when we act, those actions really inform even more the stories, and the stories inform the actions and the service. So that's why the service might be simple. The service might be picking up the paper towel in the bathroom on the floor. We're practicing doing something for somebody else, something that maybe inconvenience us a bit. The service may be, of course, involved with connecting. Last time I was here at Elon, I was in a classroom, those new buildings right across the street from the Truett Center, those classrooms there, and we called Washington, D.C. on the number 1-800-GENOCIDE. Do any of you remember from the last lecture I told you I was going to do that on my way up to D.C.? I was going to, anyway. You know who answered the phone? We punched 1-800-GENOCIDE. Put in your zip code so they know where they can hook you up with your representative, your senator. It was a kid who had graduated from Elon. We're like, get out of here. And then well, wait, let me put you through to somebody else here in the office. They graduated from Elon. And what were they finding out? They were finding out that people in Washington, D.C., unlike a lot of the stories that go around, a bunch of egotistical people only trying to serve their own interest, there are actually people in Washington, D.C. who care. There's people in Washington, D.C. who are passionate about making a better planet. They're often under 30 or at least under 40, and as you build relationships with those people, you ask for the legislative assistant in your senator's office, the legislative assistant in your representative's office. You're taking action to connect up with the stories, and you'll often find people who are passionate like you about changing the world. That's why they're there. And it's not often the senator and the representative who really make the difference anyway. It's the people who are bringing stuff to their desk and putting it in front of them, the people who are helping to really shape and change policy. So stories and service are, to me, the tools, whether we're dealing with foreign policy issues or whether we're dealing with dysfunction within the dormitory or within the home. Stories and service. Stories have a way of affecting our thinking, that affects our feeling, that affects our actions. And so, thank you for that, and thank you all very much for coming out this evening.